I was on my phone and I saw a post of Jon Jones' tour from Thailand where he did a Q&A at the end of one of his seminars, and an English fan asked him about the Tom Aspinall fight. And check this out. Tell me what you think about this.
When are you fighting Tom?
The UFC, and Tom, we all got a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes. They're one of the biggest organizations in sports. And right now, Tom and I have agreed to wait for the UFC to make their announcements. So I legally can't talk about it.
I think this all but confirms that the fight is pretty much done, and we're talking about a booked fight whenever we say Jones versus Aspinall. If there was no movement behind this fight happening, why would both of these fighters be forced to sign an NDA? If Jon Jones had to be contractually obligated to not mention the fight, that also means that Tom Aspinall is in the same boat as him. So why would they be playing these types of games with their fighters that they don't have any intent on actually matchmaking with each other? I think that they do. Jon Jones has confirmed that he and Tom Aspinall have put the ball in the UFC's court. So I'm going to talk about the reasons why I am led to believe that this fight is finished. As we're speaking right now, we are going to get this fight at some point either late 2025 or early 2026. So at the end of the year, we're going to have broadcasting deal renegotiations or potential negotiations with another company that's not ESPN that the UFC will sign with to be able to broadcast their events through their platforms. This is a super low-key theory that only people who are tapped in know about. This guy in one of my comment sections on Instagram, I made a post and he said, "The theory of the UFC waiting on a new broadcast deal to make this fight is so slept on, lol. It makes a lot more sense than all the Jon Jones conspiracies people are making up." The UFC gets paid by hosting networks like ESPN or potentially Netflix, like people are rumoring, for the rights to broadcast their content. So this deal is in essence the value of whatever fights executives believe that the UFC can put on for however long the contract agreement stands. So they're looking at the landscape of the UFC right now, and they're like, with the fighters you have currently enrolled in the roster, in the next 5 years, how much money can they make with the fights that you have to produce? So in order for your fight promotion to have a higher value at these meetings, you would then need to be sitting on a few big super fights that could lead to other super fights and big contenders who haven't spent their primes yet outside of the deal that you're trying to make for the new contract. In 2019, ESPN came up with a number of $1.5 billion for 2020 through 2025, the rights to the streaming for those 5 years. And this is a big number, but for reference, the NFL, which is a domestic American football organization, signed with 5 different major TV channels in America for $111 billion in exchange for 11 years of their streaming rights. We're in a pinch with scheduling right now, in part because of the lack of depth in some divisions, making it so that we can't have all of the top 10 contenders fight each other in the meantime of shelving big fights like heavyweight, but also because each big fight that you could be sitting on going into these negotiations could be worth a few extra $100 million that the UFC can negotiate for with Netflix or whoever else that they're going to get bought by. They have certain fighters like Ilia Topuria and Islam Makhachev who are bargaining chips for these types of deals. You can say, we have a champion, Islam Makhachev. He's going to go up for one super fight, and if he wins, he's going to go back down for another super fight. And you can pay us to host this event that will bring lots of pay-per-view buys and eyes onto it. If Islam doesn't retire, you could then get into all of the different contenders at lightweight who could give him a good fight for the belt. With heavyweight, you're talking about Jones versus Aspinall, and then afterwards, you're talking about, if Aspinall wins, fighting Gane, Almeida, Volkov again, and then 2 other guys that he's already beaten at the 4 and 5 spot. So they can't make all their super fights right now, and they need to slowly pace a couple of them, like the Jones versus Aspinall matchup, like Islam Makhachev, and this is just so that they can promise these big events that will sell a lot of pay-per-views whenever they're negotiating these new broadcast deals. But it minorly bugs me whenever people say the division should move on, or the best should fight the best, and that's the reason why we should strip Jon Jones. Because that wouldn't even be what would be going down anyways if there was no Jon Jones in this picture, based off of the 6 fighters that I have at the bottom left side of the screen right there. People are dying to see Tom Aspinall in any fight, but the quality of the win that he may get over Jones is the only thing that will legitimize him as an all-time great. And if Jones is forced to vacate, we don't get this fight. And Aspinall's legacy is still really good, but largely it's banter. That's if he's not able to fight Jon Jones because they stripped him and forced him to retire, or wrapped him up inside of a mat and doused it in gasoline and then lit it on fire and threw it off of the side of a cliff. like people are actually asking for on Instagram. They might make a petition for that next. I just don't agree with how people feel like Ciryl Gane or any other heavyweight fighter that isn't Jon Jones is an acceptable matchup for Tom Aspinall that we will just take under any circumstance. Gane was good enough for us as a title challenger against Francis. We didn't know what his skill ceiling was at the time. But even then, he became interim champ from beating Tai Tuivasa, and this just further exemplifies the lack of depth that heavyweight has had for years now. So Francis ends up leaving. It was a quarrel over money with Jon Jones. Jones gets to fight Ciryl Gane, he chokes him out in a couple of minutes, and now Ciryl Gane is a can. And I kind of already thought this after the Francis fight, but this kind of confirmed it in the eyes of us all. But now that we're all against Jon Jones, Ciryl Gane is perfectly fit to challenge for another title. And in my eyes, that doesn't make any sense. Ciryl Gane can't just be situationally good enough to fight for belts just because we don't like the guy who is the main champion, and there's the interim guy who we feel like he won't unify with. It's only been 7 months since his last defense. So say we were to strip Jon Jones, Gane and Almeida both do nothing for Aspinall. From a legacy perspective, I think Tom Aspinall knows this too, and that's why he isn't calling for any additional defense. Even though he threatens it, he's like, I might have to move on to something else. The UFC wouldn't allow him to do this anyway, since they want him to fight Jon Jones. And that's why they're both under a non-disclosure agreement to not talk about the fight and to let the UFC announce it officially. They only allowed Tom to avenge his Blades loss so that he didn't have any untied loose ends going to this Hall of Fame fight, and they could market it as the best fighting the best. Aside from this, Tom has already beaten Volkov, and their rematch is the same as Yair versus Volk 2. But people are actually asking for this rematch at heavyweight. That rematch would make zero sense, and Tom Aspinall would win in even less time, probably, the second go-around. It's Jon Jones or nothing. I don't want to see any of those fights. So we can have a larger talk about retirement fights in general. If Jones versus Aspinall happens this year, it will be in November when the UFC goes back to Madison Square Garden. They usually do an event over there at this time of the year, and this is home court advantage for Jones, and he's going to want this. He's not going to fight Tom Aspinall in the O2 Arena in London. This fight will happen in America, and Jones will retire in a big stadium in his home country. That's the way that he's going to want it to happen. This is definitely going to be a retirement fight for Jon Jones as a 37-year-old fighter. He'll have nothing to do himself after beating Tom Aspinall if that does happen for him. And if he loses, I'm not sure if he would want to go through a trilogy at the age of 37. But granted, we just talked about the broadcasting deal. My guess is that this fight is going to be saved for the negotiations, or afterwards, I think. And that would mean that we're looking at around January or February for this event, and I'm fine with that. I can wait until that long. It'll been a whole year since Dustin fought Islam before he makes his return to fight Holloway in his retirement fight. If you mean anything to the organization, they'll carefully plan out your retirement fight, and they'll make it a whole event out of it. This requires planning and sometimes waiting on our part to make sure that things work out the way that they should. Robbie Lawler's retirement fight took 1 year in between his loss to Barberena and his fight with Nico Price that he won. And it had been over a year in between Anderson Silva fighting with Jared Cannonier and his retirement fight with Uriah Hall. People like to bring up Jon Jones' 3 fights in the last 5 years, but this was over money like I talked about before. Situationally, fighter pay is an issue that fans take seriously, but whenever it's Jon Jones asking to be compensated tens of millions of dollars to, at the time, go up from 205, become a heavyweight, and challenge the heaviest puncher in the division's history who shored up his grappling so that he's more complete now, and he's just a light heavyweight. People called him a duck for not agreeing to fight that guy for $10 million. He wanted like 50, and that's honestly a fair bid for fighting Francis Ngannou with the legacy that he has. And if they weren't even trying to pay him that 10, that's absolutely ridiculous. And I know that they weren't trying to give Francis Ngannou anything close to that. And he was just as content on not fighting for that low of a paycheck as Jon Jones was. So that fight wasn't going to happen because of the UFC. That fight would have been a gift to the fans because there would have been no possible way the UFC would have made money on that event with how much each of the fighters would have been required to have been paid to fight. If only Turki Al-Sheikh was a guy who was around at that time, we probably would have gotten Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. People also ignore the videos you can see on the internet of Jon Jones literally ripping his pectoral, wrestling with Curtis Blades, and also undergoing surgery and showing that he just had surgery and being like, yeah, guys, I'm about to get surgery, and recordings from his Instagram live where he's like, thank you guys for the support. I'm about to go to sleep right now for pectoral surgery. And this happened in October 2023 before the Stipe fight. And that was the whole reason why the interim title is even a thing. Because Jon Jones was supposed to fight Stipe Miocic much earlier than he actually did because he got hurt. and he had to recover from this. People expected Jon Jones to come back from injury and change opponents just because the interim title was a thing now. And he could have done this, but I don't think he should have been expected to fight Aspinall at this time. He already had agreed to fight Stipe, so that would then make Aspinall the next one in line, and he is. And it is Jon Jones versus Aspinall right now that we're targeting. You guys, it's only been 7 months since the Stipe fight, and on average, retirement fights take at least a year to come together, as we just established. As heavyweight champion, this guy has had 2 defenses in 3 years with a major injury that required surgery to recover from. So he's not doing bad as far as activity goes. And he's a very high profile fighter, so these guys aren't fighting every other Saturday regardless. So now we'll talk about the Thailand tour. Jon Jones' response to that English guy who asked a question at the seminar and saying that he was contractually agreed to not speak about Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall, the fight, means that this was probably a UFC-sponsored business trip that they allowed Jon Jones to go on while they set up this fight with Tom and other very important events that we're still also waiting on. This is going to be like his last world tour before he fights his champion for the final time before retiring from MMA. And it blows my mind that people are surprised that Jon Jones has gone to Thailand and he's getting high there. Guys with the kind of problems that Jon Jones has will abuse substances no matter where they are. All being in Thailand means is that he has easier access to harder drugs, but he could go to Vegas or LA in America for the same experience, but just at a larger cost. Jon Jones' past, I did some research into it. It's actually riddled with a lot of pain and torment through experiences that were completely out of his control. He lost his mom in the year 2017, which that's like 8 years ago, but it's still pretty recent in terms of the fact that he is 37. She died because she had diabetes, and he had an older sister too, who growing up had a brain cancer and died before she turned 18. And we don't know about this stuff because Jon Jones never talks about any of it. And his true pain manifests in his behavior away from fighting. And that's why you see him on the back of these motorcycles looking like the devil himself in the eyes. That is a scary photo. He looks like a Ben 10 alien. The other guy looks loaded too. He shouldn't be operating that vehicle. It's the same way in rap music. Artists like Kodak Black will get strung out on Instagram Live and people will laugh instead of showing concern for the health of these individuals. Mental health is only a serious topic in MMA whenever Paddy Pimblett brings it up. But people will post that clip of him being like, if you're a man and you feel like you can't talk, and then they'll shit all over Jon Jones, who's been clearly struggling with something for a long time. I have no excuses for the pool video either. Whenever people bring up the bike, whatever, he just got loaded. But the pool stuff, and he's out there just getting like slung around the pool in the water with all these shirtless men around him, like, nah, dude. I don't really like those scenes. But it seems like a Russian custom to be into doing this, and he wouldn't be the first captured on footage in a hot tub with a bunch of other sweaty dudes. And this type of thing is always associated with the guys from that mountain steppe region of the world. I don't know what their infatuation with the jacuzzi is. Nobody ever gives them a hard time about it. I cropped the photoshopped Umar out of the top right picture of all the different ones of them in the hot tub. But people just laughed about this, even though, I mean, no matter what reason you're doing it for, it's always really sus to just be like 2 arms around your homeboys in the pool or hot tub. And you got Charles Oliveira inside of the weight cutting tent with Felipe Dos Santos and Daniel Santos, and they're like spooning each other, and he's Little Spoon, and people give this a pass because they just like the guy. Jon Jones definitely displays some pretty sus mannerisms, but I don't think that we should be reading into this as far as we are, to be honest, if we don't for anybody else. As there are all these different petitions and campaigns going on around to strip Jon Jones, and what is Tom Aspinall doing about everything? He's staying cool and calm. And to me, that indicates that this fight is done. Like, it's booked. And that we're just waiting on the announcement from the UFC. I wouldn't be surprised if, in lieu of actual fights that he may have taken in this time, the UFC just outwardly hooked up Tom Aspinall fat. And if they didn't just give him money straight because he hasn't been fighting, they probably paid him so much for the Curtis Blades fight. Or the UFC is working to help him get big sponsorship placements in the meantime of this fight being made. They're definitely helping him out some way, because he would be complaining if he was getting just absolutely strung along by the UFC right now. It seems like Tom Aspinall still likes everyone, so that means that they must be treating him good to some level. Last year when we were targeting Jones versus Miocic, Aspinall was accusing Jones of ducking or making more posts with the duck emojis a lot more often than he does nowadays. Recently, since like April, he only mentions this fight when people ask about it on podcasts or in interviews that he does. He never talks about it first. And I did some diving on the bottom right corner looking for podcast screenshots to put in the video, and I accidentally found Tom Aspinall leaking that the fight has been made indirectly. Alright, so let me know what you think about this.
Jon Jones doesn't want to take the risk at the moment, so I actually have a meeting tonight about it, so we're going to find out what happens tonight, believe it or not.
What do you think you can do to make that fight happen?
May 12th, in the middle of last month. Since May 12th, we haven't had any type of Alex Pereira crash out on social media from Tom Aspinall. They must have come to some type of agreement to where all parties involved are hunky-dory and everything is fine and we're going to get the fight and everything is going to be good. Tom is so secure in this fight being made that he's pump faking major announcements on his social media accounts with these clickbaited posts that end up being reveals for new brand deals like a champion campaign that he's probably making good money from. Another thing that I noticed is Tom Aspinall's feed is him in the gym training all of the time. We've been beefing in these comment sections and Tom Aspinall has just been getting ready for this fight since late February. Based off of how his IG posts look, they all of a sudden changed from a ton of travel posts to him getting back in the gym and then doing a lot of bag and pad work. And that video that I just showed you earlier is evidence enough to say that he pretty much confirmed this fight as well. And nobody watches these interviews, so they think that there's just a bunch of unanswered questions or like there's no progress that's being made towards this, but there is, and there's probably been a lot more than we all think has been made towards this fight happening. And it's a lot closer to being finalized. If it hasn't already been, like I'm telling you that I think that it is, there's very little things for there to be figured out before we can get Jon Jones versus Aspinall at this point. Because yes, a lot of time has passed. But the UFC is the best organization in MMA and potentially combat sports. I love the product so much. And the way that everything is handled, there's a few revisions that can be made, but they will be over time. It's all part of the process that we're all committed to going through and watching and being fans of this sport. So you guys are all my friends. These types of channels, like the one that I have, they're driven by opinion. But I always try to base my beliefs on cited sources that can become the grounds for whatever point I'm trying to make. I don't like dealing in hypotheticals much. And that's the reason why this debate with Jones versus Aspinall is super annoying to me. Much of the fan base is under the impression that things are a certain way that they have no way of confirming them to be. Like saying Jon Jones is ducking Tom Aspinall because he knows that he beats him super easily. There's no way to know that until we see them fight. It's heavyweight, and it's a fist fight in general, and we know that anything can happen. Unless it's this because we have an angled stance against one of the fighters on a personal level. But vendettas aside, we all just want to watch the fight, and MMA has some imperfections. We're a growing sport dealing with 1/12 of the cash accessible to the NFL. The brand will not get everything right at this moment in time. Even with just having celebrated 30 years, the sport is still incredibly new, and it hasn't even gotten to a point where it's had the opportunity to fall off. Because even though the things that happen in the UFC and in MMA matter, it's not large enough to the point where you could be like, oh yeah, there was actually a golden age of the sport. Because even back then, during like Pride Era or Strikeforce, the ratings weren't on par with what they are right now. And the quality of the fights was just not as good. In 30 years of MMA, we haven't seen the best MMA fighter yet, or even the best events ever yet. We'll likely see the best of everything the sport has to offer years removed from now whenever we're much older and MMA is much larger than it is in 2025. But that's going to take us sticking with it and viewing it even whenever the main event is Blanchfield versus Barber, because this is all just part of the growing process of MMA. So if you don't agree with this video again and you made it to this point, these are other things that you can watch that aren't my channel. You can leave a dislike and you can go and watch any of those things in the bottom left corner. And another thing that I want to end with is, I forgive all of the guys from the Crack Streams live chat who made it into my comments section to start being racist. I forgive each of you, but I really hope that you change your ways. One of these guys left a comment section on the Aspinall video talking about, I think Aspinall's dry humor may be a bit lost on you boys across the pond, saying that I don't get Tom Aspinall's jokes because he's British. I get them, I just don't think that they're very funny, bro. And this absolute Nikola Tesla level intellect is going to comment under the third reply and say, I think it's a bit more than that. Maybe the color or tone of the language interpretation. Another guy just left a lone comment that said, rather back corny than a wife-beating drug cheat gay guy. Always a black guy every time. I obviously know why this is happening, and I'm not going to back down on my points just because that's what I think, and this is my goddamn channel, so if you don't like it, don't watch it. Just know I won't go to those places. Even whenever people try to make me go to those places, I probably just won't. Remember, fellas, do not wrestle the pig. You guys will both get muddy, and the pig will enjoy it. Have a wonderful day. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you made it to this point in the video. We are going to end up watching Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall.